The crowd was expecting a debate, what they got was a demolition. Jasmine Crockett walked into a room stacked against her, facing Laura Ingraham, one of the sharpest and most controversial voices in conservative media. But by the time the debate ended, it wasn't just Crockett's words people were talking about, it was how she exposed every flaw in Laura's game. No shouting. No gimmicks. Just facts, fire, and fearless truth. This wasn't politics as usual. This was a complete takedown, and it left the entire room speechless. Let's break down how it all unfolded. The tension was thick from the first second Jasmine Crockett walked onto that stage. She knew exactly what was coming. Laura Ingraham, known for her sharp tongue and unapologetic conservative takes, was sitting just feet away, ready to pounce. But what nobody expected was how quickly the tables would turn. The event was billed as a civil discourse panel, one of those forums where political opposites are supposed to come together and share ideas. But let's be honest, there was nothing civil about what happened next. From the moment the cameras went live, it was no longer a conversation, it was a showdown. And Jasmine? She wasn't backing down. The audience could feel it. There was electricity in the room. The moderator gave the floor to Laura first, and she wasted no time. With that trademark smirk, she dove straight into her usual rhetoric, throwing out sharp criticism of the Democratic Party, framing crime, the economy, and immigration as products of failed liberal policies. Her tone was aggressive, her words pointed. She clearly came to dominate the conversation. But Crockett didn't flinch. She waited. Patient. Listening. Letting Laura go on. And when it was her turn to speak, she didn't raise her voice, she raised the stakes. Laura, she began, you love to talk about problems, but you never talk about the cause. You act like things happen in a vacuum. But the reality is, these issues you bring up, crime, inequality, distrust in government, those didn't just appear overnight. They are the result of decades of underinvestment, suppression, and manipulation by systems that benefit the few over the many. The crowd stirred. Laura leaned forward, trying to interrupt. But what about personal responsibility? Crockett held up her hand. I'm speaking, she said calmly. That's when you knew this wasn't going to be the usual back and forth. This wasn't the same old cable news debate. Jasmine had come with facts, fire, and fearlessness. It's fascinating, Crockett continued, how people like you never want to talk about who created these systems. Who benefits when communities are denied funding, when voting rights are restricted, when public education is gutted, when corporations dodge taxes. You say liberal policies have failed, but what you're really afraid of is policies that include people who've been left out for generations. The room was silent. Laura blinked, thrown off balance. She tried to pivot to border security, but Crockett was ready for that too. You talk about the border like it's some kind of invasion, she said. But you never talk about the foreign policies that destabilize those regions in the first place. You never mention the corporations that profit from cheap labor and chaos. You only focus on fear. Because fear sells. It was a masterclass. Crockett wasn't just responding, she was reframing the entire conversation. And Laura knew it. She tried a new tactic, mockery. You sound like a college sociology professor, Laura sneered. Well, maybe it's time America started listening to its professors instead of its pundits, Crockett shot back, and the audience erupted in applause. The moderator tried to intervene, but the moment had already taken on a life of its own. For the next 10 minutes, Jasmine Crockett tore through one conservative talking point after another. On healthcare, she said, you say government healthcare is too expensive. But what's the cost of people dying because they can't afford insulin? On policing, you defend law and order, but turn a blind eye when the law is abused by those in power. On education, you call it indoctrination when students learn the truth, but it's only indoctrination when it challenges your version of history. Laura looked stunned. Her usual playbook wasn't working. The crowd wasn't cheering her on, they were listening to Jasmine. Really listening. It was the kind of moment that reminded everyone watching, when someone speaks with clarity, truth, and courage, even the loudest voices in the room can be silenced. And that's exactly what Jasmine did. She didn't insult. She didn't scream. She dismantled arguments with precision, with calm fury, with power. By the end of the panel, the applause wasn't just polite, it was thunderous. People stood. People cheered. And Laura? She gave a tight smile, nodded, and looked away. Because she knew this wasn't just a debate she had lost. This was a moment. A viral moment. A cultural shift. One where a black congresswoman from Texas sat across from one of the most influential conservative voices in media, and took control of the narrative. As the cameras faded and people began posting clips, one thing was clear: Jasmine Crockett didn't just show up to speak. She showed up to lead. Laura Ingraham leaned in with that signature smirk, clearly feeling confident, and dropped a line she's used 100 times before: "Congresswoman, don't you think it's irresponsible to keep blaming systemic issues instead of holding people accountable?" It was a classic conservative bait. She wanted Jasmine to either backpedal or fumble. But what she didn't realize was, Jasmine came prepared. Dead calm, Crockett adjusted her mic, looked Laura straight in the eyes, and hit back with a fire the audience wasn't ready for. "Let's be real," she said. "The only thing irresponsible here is pretending that these individual decisions happen in a world where the system isn't already rigged." Boom. The crowd leaned in. Jasmine wasn't playing defense, she flipped the whole thing. "You talk about accountability like it's only for poor people, black folks, and immigrants. But where's the accountability when billionaires dodge taxes? Where's the accountability when politicians spread lies and then hide behind free speech?" Laura's smile started to fade. You could tell it wasn't the response she expected. She interrupted, trying to regain control. "That's a false equivalency. People still have to take responsibility for their own choices." But Jasmine didn't miss a beat. "You know what's a false equivalency?" she fired back. "Acting like someone who grew up in a broken school system, in a community flooded with guns and drugs, has the same choices as a kid who went to private school, had tutors, healthcare, and security. That's what's false." A wave of applause started to build. Laura tried to change the subject fast, reaching for immigration again, a favorite fallback. She said, "We're spending billions on programs that help people who aren't even citizens while our own are suffering. Shouldn't Americans come first?" Jasmine nodded slowly, almost smiling, and said, "Yes. Americans should come first. That's why I fight for universal health care, for housing programs, for better wages, because guess what? The people struggling in this country aren't struggling because immigrants are getting too much help. They're struggling because corporations are getting tax cuts while workers get pennies. They're struggling because you have lobbyists writing laws while families are drowning in debt." At that moment, it wasn't just a debate, it was a clinic. Jasmine was shifting the whole framework. She wasn't reacting to Laura's points. She was exposing the game behind the talking points. Then came a sharp moment. Laura said, "But don't you think it's dangerous to keep telling people they're victims? Doesn't that just breed resentment?" Jasmine sat forward, looked directly at the crowd, and said, "I'm not telling people they're victims. I'm telling them they've been lied to. Lied to by the very people who pretend to care while cutting their schools, slashing their health care, and sending their jobs overseas. I'm telling them the truth." The audience was locked in. You could hear a pin drop. Laura tried to hit back with a sarcastic jab, "Sounds like socialism to me." Jasmine didn't flinch. "If taking care of our people is socialism," she said, "then explain to me why every member of Congress, including you, gets government health care, government salaries, and taxpayer-funded benefits. Or is it only socialism when poor people benefit?" That was it. The crowd broke. Applause. Cheers. Some even stood up. Laura couldn't respond. She paused, looked at the moderator, and gave a stiff smile. Because in that moment, the power dynamic had flipped. Laura wasn't leading the conversation anymore, she was barely holding on. And Jasmine? She was on fire. Calm. Focused. Sharp. Every word she said wasn't just an answer, it was an indictment of everything Laura was standing on. Crockett didn't raise her voice once, and yet the weight of her words was shaking the room. She wasn't emotional, she was surgical. Every question Laura asked was turned into an opportunity. Every dig was turned into a deeper truth. She called out the hypocrisy, the double standards, the historical amnesia. She showed receipts. Real-life examples. Policy facts. Working-class stories. And the crowd wasn't just clapping, they were learning. That was the real difference. Laura came to talk over people. Jasmine came to talk to them. She was speaking from a place of lived experience and deep knowledge. And that combination? It's unbeatable. By the end of the segment, Laura had run out of her usual tricks. The smugness was gone. The crowd wasn't on her side anymore. Clips were already being cut. Phones were recording. Because everyone watching knew, they'd just witnessed something big. Not just a rebuttal. Not just a comeback. A dismantling. Jasmine Crockett didn't just hold her own. She flipped the whole narrative. With grace. With facts. And with a kind of energy that can't be rehearsed. It was bold. It was brilliant. And it left Laura speechless. By this point, the audience wasn't just watching, they were locked in. Phones were up. Clips were already making their way online. People in the room knew they were witnessing something they hadn't seen in a long time, a politician refusing to back down, refusing to be boxed in, and doing it all with poise and facts. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. The moderator shifted to a new topic, race and education. And just like that, Laura Ingraham saw another opening to push her narrative. She leaned into the mic and said, "We're seeing schools focus more on equity than excellence. Don't you think teaching about oppression and race just divides our kids?" It was the kind of question designed to win applause from a certain crowd. A setup. But Jasmine saw it from a mile away. She straightened in her seat, took a deep breath, and launched into one of the most cutting responses of the night. "What divides our kids," she said, "is lying to them. What divides our kids is pretending that history doesn't matter. What divides them is when we teach half the story and expect them to build a whole future." You could feel the room shift again. Jasmine wasn't speaking in political jargon. She was speaking like a leader who knew what she was talking about. "You think learning about racism divides us?" she continued. "No, racism divides us. You think talking about injustice is the problem? No, the problem is the injustice itself. Naming the wound isn't the same as causing it." Laura tried to interrupt, waving her hand, but Jasmine kept going. "You want to talk about excellence? Then let's talk about the excellence being denied to black and brown kids every single day. Let's talk about schools that still have outdated books, no air conditioning, and underpaid teachers while private academies get millions in tax breaks. Let's talk about how some kids are born into zip codes that decide whether they'll go to college or prison." There were gasps from the audience. Because this wasn't just politics anymore. It was raw. It was real. And it hit hard. Laura tried again to steer things, but parents have a right to know what their kids are learning. Isn't that fair? Jasmine nodded. Absolutely. Parents deserve transparency. But what they don't deserve is censorship. What they don't deserve is a political agenda that erases Black history, Indigenous history, Latino history, LGBTQ history, just because it makes people uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable. That's how we change. The moderator was clearly caught between trying to stay neutral and letting this powerful moment play out. But by now, it was out of their hands. The audience was visibly reacting, nodding, clapping, murmuring. Laura was running out of ammo. She threw out a final punch. "Well, all I'm saying is we should be teaching kids to love their country, not hate it." Jasmine didn't miss a beat. "I love this country enough to tell it the truth," she said. "I love this country enough to fight for what it could be, not just what it pretends to be. And I love this country enough to demand that we stop teaching kids fairy tales and start teaching them how to change the world." That line hit like lightning. There was silence, and then a long, rolling wave of applause. Laura sat back, blinking. She wasn't just losing a debate, she was losing control of the room. Jasmine had taken every single talking point and turned it inside out. And she did it without yelling, without name-calling, without theatrics. She used truth like a blade, precise, sharp, and impossible to ignore. That's what made it so effective. Because while Laura was trying to win an argument, Jasmine was speaking for the people who never get invited to the table. The working-class parents. The students in underfunded schools. The teachers begging for supplies. The communities that get talked about but never talked to. And it showed. You could feel it. This wasn't just a battle of ideologies, it was a battle of realities. And Jasmine brought reality with her, every step of the way. When the moderator finally called for a break, Laura reached for her water, looking stiff and uneasy. Jasmine, on the other hand, leaned back calmly, her expression unreadable, but her impact undeniable. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. Because she didn't come to win points, she came to speak the truth. And truth, when delivered like that, doesn't need theatrics. It stands on its own. The cameras were still rolling, but the moment had already gone viral in the room itself. You could hear people whispering, texting, recording. One person said out loud, "She just ended Laura." And they weren't wrong. This wasn't just a heated debate, it was a turning point. A viral storm waiting to happen. A masterclass in how to use the stage, not to perform, but to lead. And Jasmine Crockett led with power, with truth, and with absolutely no fear. After the break, everyone expected the energy to settle. Maybe both sides would cool off. Maybe the moderator would steer the conversation to safer topics. But that didn't happen. Because Jasmine Crockett came back even stronger. And this time, it wasn't just about defending herself, it was about flipping the spotlight onto Laura Ingraham's entire platform. The next topic was media bias and trust in journalism. A softball for Laura, who's made her career claiming that mainstream media is corrupt, liberal, and anti-American. She leaned forward with her usual edge and said, "Congresswoman, I think it's obvious to anyone watching that the media favors Democrats. Networks push liberal narratives, suppress conservative voices, and make people like me the enemy." You could see it, Laura thought she had the upper hand again. She thought this was the moment to corner Jasmine. But she was wrong. Jasmine sat up, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Laura, the media isn't biased against conservatives. The media is biased toward sensationalism. Toward division. Toward anything that keeps people afraid and glued to the screen. That's why you have a primetime show." The audience reacted instantly. A few laughs, a few surprised gasps. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "You don't go on air to inform people," she continued. "You go on air to inflame them. Every night, you talk about crime, immigration, race, but only when it fits your script. You use fear like it's a business model. Because it is a business model. Your job isn't to tell the truth, it's to stir outrage. And the sad part is, it works." Laura tried to cut in with a fake laugh, "Oh please, don't act like Democrats don't do the same thing." But Jasmine raised her voice just slightly, controlled and firm. "I'm not here to defend bad media. I'm here to call out hypocrisy. You call yourself a journalist, but you push conspiracy theories, undermine elections, and attack anyone who challenges the status quo. You use your platform to demonize activists, to discredit movements, and to scare your audience into believing that change means chaos. But change doesn't mean chaos. It means progress. And yes, it's uncomfortable. But that's not a reason to fight it. That's a reason to lean into it." The crowd clapped again, louder this time. Laura's face was starting to tighten. She was shifting in her seat, clearly rattled. And Jasmine kept pressing. "Let's talk about who really gets silenced," she said. Is it you, with your multimillion-dollar contract, on national television 5 nights a week? Or is it the single mom who gets arrested for protesting police brutality? Is it you, with a direct line to lawmakers and corporate sponsors? Or is it the teachers getting fired for trying to tell the truth about history? Every line was sharper than the last. Jasmine wasn't just defending herself, she was exposing a whole system. You love to talk about cancel culture, she said. But what about the real cancellations, like when people of color are denied loans, denied jobs, denied healthcare? What about when entire communities are cut off from opportunity? That's not cancel culture. That's structural oppression. But you never talk about that, because it doesn't fit the victim narrative you like to push. Laura tried to fire back. You're twisting everything I say. I give people a voice, people who feel ignored. Jasmine leaned forward, unwavering. No, Laura. You don't give people a voice. You give them someone to blame. That's not leadership. That's manipulation. And it's dangerous. That line shook the room. The moderator looked stunned. Even some conservative panelists sitting nearby were visibly speechless. Because what Jasmine was doing wasn't just debating, she was delivering truth with a level of clarity that couldn't be spun, couldn't be reframed. She wasn't playing by traditional rules. She wasn't giving in to shouting matches. She was showing what happens when facts, fire, and lived experience come together. She talked about the lives lost from misinformation during the pandemic. She talked about how the media plays games with issues like police violence and gun control. She even called out how real journalism has been pushed to the sidelines while outrage gets the spotlight. And every point hit harder than the last. The crowd wasn't just reacting, they were absorbing. Laura had no comeback. Not a real one. All she could do was smirk, shake her head, and say, well, that's your opinion. And Jasmine calmly responded, no, it's lived reality. And that's what scares you the most. You can dismiss facts all day, but you can't erase the truth people carry with them every single day. The crowd erupted again. Some people even stood up. The moderator finally had to step in, saying, we need to wrap this topic, but it was too late. Jasmine had already won the moment. Laura looked away, trying to laugh it off. But the damage was done. She wasn't the star of this segment anymore. She had been outmatched, out-argued, and outclassed. Jasmine Crockett had taken the narrative, the momentum, and the audience, and she did it with nothing but truth and fearlessness. In the days that followed, clips of Jasmine Crockett's performance flooded social media. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, every platform had its own viral edit. Some showed her shutting Laura down in real time. Others put captions over her best quotes with music in the background. But no matter how it was cut, the message was the same. Jasmine didn't just win a debate, she redefined what political courage looks like. People who had never heard of her were suddenly searching her name. Comments poured in by the thousands. Who is she? She needs her own show. She just exposed everything wrong with these fake debates. It wasn't just Democrats or progressives hyping her up, people from across the spectrum were reacting. Even conservatives who didn't agree with her policies were forced to admit, she came prepared, she came correct, and she didn't fold. The full debate was posted online and within hours, it hit 1 million views. Political commentators did reaction videos. Podcasts broke down every moment. Hashtags started trending, hashtag Crockett vs. Ingraham, hashtag Jasmine snaps, hashtag truth over trolls. It was everywhere. But while the internet buzzed with memes and reactions, something deeper was happening too. Young people, especially Gen Z and Black voters, saw something they rarely get in mainstream political coverage: representation that's unapologetic, informed, and sharp. Jasmine didn't code switch. She didn't water it down. She spoke directly, with no filter, and it resonated. Her tone wasn't just professional, it was authentic. And that authenticity hit harder than any viral soundbite. She wasn't polished like a cable news anchor, and she didn't speak in rehearsed political slogans. She spoke like someone who knew the system, had lived through its failures, and was done playing nice about it. That kind of energy doesn't fade, it spreads. Local organizers began clipping parts of her debate for their campaigns. Educators used her rebuttals in classrooms. Activists started calling for her to headline political events. And even media professionals had to take notice. A few conservative sites tried to spin it, calling her aggressive or emotional. But that only backfired. Because the clips showed the truth, she wasn't yelling, she wasn't hostile. She was focused. And when a black woman brings truth with composure and intelligence, calling her aggressive doesn't discredit her anymore. It just exposes who can't handle being challenged. Meanwhile, Laura Ingraham stayed mostly silent. No tweets, no rants. She avoided any direct reference to the debate, and when she did speak about it briefly on her show, she called it predictable liberal theater, but viewers weren't buying it. The comment section beneath that clip? Full of people calling it a weak deflection. Because the people had already seen the footage. And the footage didn't lie. What Jasmine Crockett did wasn't theater. It was truth-telling. It was accountability. It was what so many Americans have been waiting to see on TV, not just someone to challenge the lies, but someone who could do it with intelligence, strength, and heart. This moment wasn't just viral, it was transformational. It proved that you don't have to scream to be powerful. You don't have to be rude to be bold. You don't have to play into TV drama to make your point. All you need is knowledge, courage, and the guts to call out hypocrisy without flinching. Jasmine Crockett walked into that debate knowing it would be hostile. She knew Laura would come loaded with sound bites and spin. And still, she showed up. She faced it. And she didn't just survive the heat, she owned it. By the end of that debate, Laura Ingraham looked like a guest on her own stage. She was defensive. She was uncomfortable. She was outmatched. And Jasmine? She looked like the future. Calm. Unshaken. Ready. This wasn't just another political back and forth. It was a defining moment. A warning shot to media figures who think they can use the same tired tricks. And a message to young leaders everywhere: speak your truth. Don't back down. And never let fear silence your facts. As the final clip of Jasmine's closing words made the rounds, "I love this country enough to tell it the truth," the comment sections weren't just celebrating. They were inspired. People weren't just cheering. They were thinking. Reevaluating. Listening. Because what Jasmine Crockett did wasn't just about destroying Laura Ingraham. It was about elevating the conversation. Changing the rules. And reminding us all that when truth walks into the room, no amount of spin can stop it. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate, she showed what leadership looks like when truth meets courage. This moment wasn't scripted. It wasn't staged. It was real. And it's exactly why voices like hers are changing the game in American politics. If you felt that impact too, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful breakdowns just like this. This is State Talk, where facts speak louder than spin. See you in the next one.